Hi, I'm Dr. G. You're a mad shrink. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist here to offer you information and advice about mental health and to challenge your assumptions. And today I may be challenging a number of assumptions. I'll be talking with you about, are you a disorder or are you a person? Why psychiatry cannot cure you. As a preface, I'd like to look just to give a thumbnail sketch about the effectiveness of modern psychiatry. And there are two pieces of evidence that indicate strongly that psychiatry is not doing for us what we would wish it to. The current prevailing model of psychiatry, mainstream psychiatry, is to evaluate people and formulate a diagnostic label that applies to them. So a diagnosis based on their signs and symptoms, and then to, most of the time, prescribe a pharmaceutical for them. That's what psychiatry is for the most part these days. There are exceptions, and I'm talking, when I say psychiatry, about the mental health profession that is practiced by MDs and DOs. I'm not talking about other mental health professionals, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and so on. So one problem we see right away with the efficacy of psychiatry is the ever increasing, exploding really, prevalence in the rate of virtually every kind of psychiatric dysfunction. Every one appears to have been increasing over time despite the plethora of pharmaceuticals, developments in psychotherapy. We are and have been becoming more and more mentally ill as a society. I don't think there's any real debate about that. People may question whether there are other factors besides the fecklessness of psychiatry, but psychiatry has not met the task of our era to help us become well from mental illness. Second of all, if we look at any particular forms of psychiatric dysfunction, and notice I'm using that term dysfunction deliberately, and I'll explain why eventually. If we, for example, look at the efficacy of psychiatry in the treatment of depression, the main treatment modality used, of course, is the antidepressant. So let's look at that for a moment. The largest and most ambitious research study undertaken to evaluate the effectiveness of antidepressants for depression was carried out a number of years ago in what was called the STAR-D trial. That's star asterisk capital D trial. You could look it up. Involved over 4,000 depressed subjects. It was sponsored by the U.S. government, and it was a study that was in 4 stages, or 4 potential stages. Each one of the subjects was prescribed an antidepressant, and if they felt better on it, they continued on it. If they didn't, then they were switched to another antidepressant or combination of medicines. If they didn't do well on that, they went to a third and then a 4th stage. The initial results proved misleading. They were statistically incorrect, and they were recalculated. And what do you suppose was the percentage of people in this study who had been depressed originally and either got better and then eventually they were able to get off the antidepressant, or who never got better? What would you say was the percentage of people, depressed people, who got well from their depression at the end of this study? It was 2.7%. That was it. The number of people that the treatment had helped in a sustained way, so they remained well. What are the reasons for psychiatry's inability to help us become well? I chalk it up to five flaws in the whole model that psychiatry espouses. Flaw number one is that the psychiatric diagnosis isolates the problem, compartmentalizes the problem from the rest of the person. And in doing so, it completely ignores the fact that everything that we experience, any symptoms we have, any illness we have, any levels of health we have, involve the whole person. And you can't really, if you want to help somebody become well, you can't really treat the diagnostic label as the sole problem. Every psychiatric disorder, or rather dysfunction, involves the whole person in one way or another. And to give you an example of how a consideration of people's psychiatric dysfunction must involve consideration of the whole person, consider for a moment about what happens when you cut your finger. After you do that, does the wound produced by the cut heal itself? No. It heals itself only through the intervention, the influence of all the other systems in your body. Your immune system that contributes to some degree of inflammation that helps the wound healing and prevents the capitalization by microbes to cause infections in your wound. The healing depends on your circulatory system, which needs to be intact and sufficient enough to promote healing. People with bad circulation, for example, some people with diabetes, have a very hard time healing even the most minor cuts. Your nervous system plays a role, your lymphatic system, in fact, your overall vitality, your general health plays a vital role in whether or not you can even heal a simple, and this is true for every kind of illness or disorder. I'll give you an example that may come as a surprise to you. Bipolar disorder is considered by everybody to be a psychiatric disorder. That's not true. It's a disorder, shall we say, or again, dysfunction of the entire person. What evidence is there for such a statement? Well, people with bipolar disorders have a significantly higher risk of developing metabolic diseases that can affect their cardiovascular health, and this is even without considering the side effects of any medications they may take. People with bipolar disorder have a significantly higher risk of dementia, of Alzheimer's. Also, and this I always found very interesting, that there's ample research evidence that ketogenic diets have actually been able to help people with bipolar disorders into remission, have helped them become well. Ketogenic diets. What is additionally interesting about that is that ketogenic diets have also, and there's very good research evidence for this, experimental evidence, ketogenic diets have actually helped people with uncontrolled epileptic seizures to resolve this problem. What in fact are the majority of mood stabilizing medicines used to help people with bipolar disorder? Well, they're anti-seizure medicines. So there's some significant crossover and interplay between bipolar disorder and the rest of our physiology that we just don't understand. But it's an illness or a dysfunction of the entire person. Flaw number two, psychiatric diagnoses, as problems are conceptualized in diagnostic labels, these are thought of as kind of entities. They're abstract nouns, things that you have. I have a bipolar disorder, or my panic attack came back. I have an obsessive compulsive disorder. they're conceptualized as things, as entities, the way we might think of a tuna fish sandwich or a 1993 Buick. I realize I'm being a little silly, but the point is that people's problems, psychiatry conceives of as abstract nouns rather than as processes or dysfunctions that have gone awry. These abstract nouns essentially alienate people from themselves because they're, again, separated from the rest of the person. You can't cure an abstract noun. However, abnormal processes, abnormal function, dysfunction, has the potential to be changed. Now, it may seem like I'm playing with semantics, but the implications are very real. Disease is not a what, but it's a how. It's a dysfunction. That implies that all disease is related to everything else about the person, as opposed to a thing that you could extract, almost like a barnacle on the hide of a whale. You cannot cure an abstraction. Only people can be cured, not abstract nouns. Flaw number 3. This is very important. Psychiatry does not conceive of the need to mobilize or strengthen the good parts of people, their self-healing resources. The only means by which anybody can heal themselves from anything. As Dr. Albert Schweitzer said a long time ago, the only healing is self-healing. The only true healing is self-healing. Yes, treatments can stimulate or strengthen your ability to heal yourself, but they can't do it all by themselves. They need something within you to work with. And so when we look, for example, again, similar analogy, we look, for example, at when you get a bad sore throat, let's say a throat's painful, it's red. Does the sore throat heal itself? No, that's impossible. It needs help from the rest of you that isn't sick, in terms of the circulation coming in to provide all the necessary ingredients to help heal and to remove waste and toxic products, the lymphatic system to provide the drainage, and the respiratory system to make sure you need to get enough air to be able to promote healing, and so on. So it requires the assistance of all of you, and that is true of the healing of psychiatric dysfunction. What is dysfunctional cannot heal itself. Sickness cannot heal sickness. So when their problems are formulated as a psychiatric diagnosis, that guarantees that they will not be able to get well from the treatment that is provided with that model in mind. Now, good therapists know this, good psychotherapists know this, and they realize that when they administer psychotherapy to their clients, in order for them to help their clients resolve their problems, they need to help the clients mobilize their strengths. So they need to know what their clients' strengths are. Intelligence, motivation to get well, the ability to hold a responsible job, the ability to maintain a positive relationship with other people as well as with the therapist, and so on. And that is the only way anybody will be able to get well through psychotherapy, is through the mobilization of that which you didn't know that you possessed to be able to overcome your problem. In a previous podcast, I described to you a case of successful hypnosis of an electrician who had little going for him, except he was an excellent electrician, and he was proud of that. So he simply, through hypnosis, utilized his knowledge of electricianship to construct mentally an electrical circuitry to stop the physical symptoms that he was having. So that was his being able to utilize his own strength through my guidance. So in order for you to get well, the psychiatric field must get better at helping people mobilize what is right with them, what is healthy about them. Flaw number 4, psychiatric diagnostic labels can confer pseudo-identities onto people so that they identify their entire being with the sick part of themselves. For example, I am a schizophrenic, or I am an obsessive compulsive. They identify what is sick about themselves and thereby create self-imposed limitations. Such statements that I am a so-and-so disorder make about as much sense as my saying I am a hemorrhoid or I am acne. And in people's attachment to psychiatric labels, they forfeit the ability to know who they really are and what they can do. So perhaps a more useful formulation of a diagnosis, let's say, instead of Bob having an obsessive compulsive disorder, one could say that Bob has struggles with obsessive compulsive thoughts, while he's also loyal to his family, a good office worker, and he can freaking wail on the tenor sax. Strengths, as well as what's wrong with you. Flaw number 5, psychiatry does not individualize people. If 20 different people came to see a particular mainstream psychiatrist and they were all depressed, they would very likely receive either the same or similar treatments, probably an antidepressant, but whatever was the favored form of treatment medication of that particular psychiatrist. Even though these are very different people with different physiologies, different biochemistry, different life histories, different talents, interests, fears, hopes, and this understandably leads to ineffective treatment in many instances because, again, psychiatrists are prescribing for the abstract noun and not for the person. Now, by comparison, there are other approaches that involve treatment of the whole person, emphasize the strengthening of self-healing resources, and can be very effective for psychiatric problems in my experience. And I've had experience with both, and I'll just present a brief vignette of each to give you a flavor. One type of treatment that involves the whole person, systemically oriented, are the different energy medicines. And I include traditional Chinese medicine, homeopathic medicine, and others. Many years ago, I saw a young woman, a college student, freshman, who had a severe bipolar disorder, severe mood swings. She had stabbed herself a couple of times, was abusing cannabis, and recurrently got into altercations with other co-eds if the other women seemed to be eyeing this patient's boyfriend. And she was also failing in her classes. She refused to take any psychiatric medicine, and so we settled upon homeopathic treatment because I already suspected what would help her, and she agreed to that. And so I gave her a single dose of a homeopathic medicine. She took it weekly for 6 weeks, started doing significantly better, and then I gave her a substantially higher dose, just 1 or 2 extra doses, and she became well. Her mood stabilized, she stopped the cannabis, she became much less jealous, her grades picked up. Oh, and I didn't mention also she had some physical issues. problems with palpitations. Those cleared up. Curiously enough, she had a great sensitivity, anything around her neck, like a choker or even a necklace, turtleneck, and that disappeared. And this particular medicine, as bizarre as it may sound, was derived from the venom of the bushmaster snake, although in such a tiny dose, a minuscule dose of it, that it could not possibly be toxic. And why? Because it fit her overall as a person. The mood swings, she was very, very talkative, the intolerance of tight things around her neck, the palpitations, the jealousy, and so forth. So it helped her become well, and when I last was in touch with her, she told me she had made the Dean's List. Second type of treatment that I'd like to mention that's also systemically oriented is a functional psychiatry or integrative psychiatry, take your pick. And that's a biologically oriented form of a psychiatry, rather, that looks for and treats root causes of problems. So, for example, a functional psychiatrist does not accept at the surface level the problem to be treated as depression, but rather looks for the root causes of that depression or the individual's vulnerability to depression. And I'll give you one case example. A woman who was in her 30s, she had a lot of bowel problems, diarrhea alternating with constipation, and she was both very anxious and quite depressed in a way that was affecting her life. So she underwent a functional evaluation, which consisted of a large number of lab tests that a conventional psychiatrist would not necessarily order. One of these tests revealed that she had an infestation in her intestines of Clostridia bacteria. Now, why is that important? Because not only were the Clostridia bacteria causing her bowel symptoms, but as many Clostridia bacteria are wont to do, they were manufacturing a chemical, HPHPA, you could look it up, that is toxic to us, and it blocks our ability to transform the mood-regulating chemical dopamine into norepinephrine, which usually we do without a problem. So it blocks it. As a result, the dopamine level in your system gets higher, and you may start feeling more agitated or anxious or other symptoms, and the norepinephrine gets lower, which can be consistent with exhaustion, depression, and so on. And once the Clostridia infection was eliminated through treatment, her mood picked up extremely well, and she did well after that. So that's an example of two alternative forms of treatment that don't include in their models the kinds of flaws that I mentioned that's conventional psychiatry today, unfortunately, has. And psychiatry's attempt to treat people without disabusing itself of these flaws is a fool's errand. And I hope my podcast today has not been a fool's errand for you, and that you've learned something of use or even of help for you. And so this is Dr. G, your mad shrink, saying goodbye until next time, and be well.